Picture this. You walk into your child's classroom,
Oh boy.
right?
Right.
The walls are covered in those bright, colorful finger paintings. The alphabet is strung up across the whiteboard, and there's that very distinct smell of wax crayons and floor wax.
Yeah, it's instantly recognizable.
And the teacher gives you this warm, welcoming smile. So you squeeze yourself into a tiny, brightly colored plastic chair that was definitely not built for an adult's knees.
Definitely not.
You sit down, the teacher looks at you, and suddenly your mind just goes completely blank. Every specific question you had, every concern you discussed with your partner the night before, it all just evaporates into thin air.
It is a universally humbling experience. I mean, you are an intelligent, capable adult, but the physical environment alone, sitting at a miniature desk while the teacher sits across from you, it recreates this very specific childhood power dynamic.
It really does.
And when we look at the communication guides we're examining today, they highlight that when you add the layer of navigating this entire scenario in a second language, well, the pressure doesn't just double, it multiplies exponentially.
That is exactly the situation we are unpacking today. Welcome to this deep dive. We are looking at a stack of real-world materials today, including parent-teacher role-play scripts, conversation workbooks designed specifically for adult ESL learners, and checklists that educators actually use on their end to manage these meetings.
Right, and the goal here isn't just to hand you a vocabulary list. We want to extract the exact phrases and mindset shifts you need. It's about equipping you with a practical, step-by-step game plan so you can walk into that classroom feeling confident, comfortable, and ready to be a strong advocate for your child.
Because the overarching theme across all these materials is that a parent-teacher conference is not a test. It's a conversation.
Exactly. It's a conversation between two parties who share the exact same goal, which is the success of the student. But bridging that communication gap requires a shift in how you prepare. You have to dismantle that intimidating power dynamic before you even step foot on the school grounds.
Which brings us to the pregame prep, the preparation phase. And the first piece of advice from the workbooks actually caught me off guard a bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They suggest that before you do anything else, you have to interview your own child. I always assumed this was a strictly adult-to-adult exchange. Why involve a 7-year-old in the prep?
Well, because the student is the primary stakeholder, yet they are almost always the invisible third party in the room. If you walk into a conference only relying on what the teacher tells you, you are only getting 50% of the story.
That makes a lot of sense.
The communication guides suggest asking your child highly specific questions a few days before the meeting. You don't just ask, do you like school? You want to ask things like, what is the hardest part of your day? Or who do you sit next to at lunch?
I can see how that focuses the agenda. If your kid mentions they hate reading out loud or that they have no one to play with during recess, you instantly know what you need to bring up. You aren't walking in blind hoping the teacher magically addresses it.
Precisely. It grounds the upcoming meeting in reality. And once you have those insights from your child, the very next step is to physically write them down.
Wait, if I walk into a 10-minute meeting and pull out a notepad, doesn't that make me look a bit like a health inspector auditing the classroom?
Yeah.
I'd worry it sets a hostile tone.
That is a very common fear. But the educator resources actually emphasize the exact opposite. Teachers appreciate a prepared parent. From a psychological standpoint, bringing notes is about managing your cognitive load.
Cognitive load.
Yeah. Our working memory can only juggle a few pieces of information at a time. When you are sitting in that tiny chair, feeling the adrenaline of nerves and simultaneously trying to translate English in your head, your cognitive load is totally maxed out.
So your brain is basically a computer with too many tabs open, and the fan is running really loud.
That is the perfect analogy. Writing down your top 3 priorities, whether in your native language or translated into English beforehand, acts as an external hard drive. It frees up your mental bandwidth to actually listen to what the teacher is saying, rather than frantically trying to remember the word for bullying or fractions.
That is such a good tip. Remind the listener to also think of a compliment for the teacher, right? Acknowledging what your child enjoys about the class sets a collaborative tone before the meeting even begins.
Yes, preparing positive feedback is crucial. It changes the whole vibe.
Okay, so we have our notepad, we've interviewed our kid, and we are walking through the classroom door. Let's talk about breaking the ice and opening the meeting. The ESL workbooks place a huge emphasis on the phrasing of the initial greeting.
They do.
It feels a bit formal, but the suggestion is to open with something like, "Good afternoon, thank you for taking the time to meet with me," or "I really appreciate everything you're doing to help my child."
The formality of those phrases is highly intentional. In many cultures, the teacher is viewed with an extreme level of unquestionable authority. But in the U.S. school system, the goal is to establish a partnership. Starting with a clear, polite expression of gratitude signals that you view the relationship as a collaboration. It lowers the defensive shields on both sides.
I suppose teachers are nervous too. I mean, they have to deliver potentially difficult news to prospective parents all day long.
They absolutely are. And that brings us to an interesting tool you'll find in the educator checklist, like the ProCare Guide for Early Childhood Teachers. Teachers are specifically trained to manage this tension using something called the sandwich method.
The sandwich method. I've heard of this in corporate performance reviews. You sandwich the bad news between two layers of good news.
Exactly the same concept, just adapted for the classroom. A trained teacher will almost never start a meeting by telling you your child is failing math. They will start with a positive anecdote, that's the top slice of bread. They might say your child is a wonderful helper, or they share beautifully during playtime. Only after establishing that warm baseline will they transition into the meat of the sandwich, which is the academic or behavioral areas needing improvement. Knowing this helps you relax, because you know what structure to expect.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've moved from small talk into the actual academic progress. The conversation guides point out a trap a lot of parents fall into, which is asking vague questions.
Yes, that is a huge pitfall.
If I just sit there and say, "How are they doing?" The teacher's probably just going to say, "Oh, they're doing fine." And then the meeting just stalls.
Vague questions get vague answers. If you want actionable data, you need targeted inquiries. The resources suggest phrases like, "Is my child working to their ability?" or "What specific skills are expected this year?" You can also ask, "What areas need improvement?"
You want to force a comparative answer that gives you a real sense of where your child stands relative to the curriculum.
Exactly. But school isn't just about math and reading, it's a social environment. So the social emotional growth questions are just as critical. You should be asking, how does my child interact with others? Or do they participate in group activities?
And if your child has seemed off at home, you could ask, "Have you noticed any sudden changes?" Teachers are observant. They notice when a kid suddenly withdraws.
They really do.
Now, as the teacher's answering these questions, we run into the language barrier head on. Teachers use specific phrasal verbs that might be confusing. I was looking through the ESL workbook, and we need to decode some of this teacher jargon.
Oh, the jargon can be so tricky.
For instance, I saw the phrase, "clam up." My immediate thought was that a parent was supposed to bring a seafood dish to the school potluck or something.
I can entirely see how you'd get there. Phrasal verbs are notoriously illogical. Clam up is a perfect example of teacher shorthand. Think of a literal clam snapping its shell tightly shut. When a teacher says, "Whenever I ask him to read, he tends to clam up," they mean the child becomes nervous and goes silent.
Okay, that visual definitely helps. Here's another one, call on. If a teacher says, "I try to call on your daughter more often," does that mean they are trying to phone us at home?
No phones involved. In a classroom setting, to call on a student means the teacher is asking a student a question out loud in front of the group. If your child clams up when called on, they are freezing up when asked to speak publicly.
That makes perfect sense. The materials also highlight fall behind and keep up with.
Those are two sides of the same academic coin. A child who is keeping up with the material is staying at the expected grade level. If a child is starting to fall behind, they are working at a slower pace than the rest of the class, and that is a signal that intervention is needed.
So let's say the teacher uses one of those phrases or introduces a totally new educational concept and you just lose the thread of the conversation. I think every single one of us has done the exact same thing in this scenario. We do the nod.
Oh yes, the nod.
The slow, polite nod of false comprehension. We smile, we nod, and we hope the topic changes quickly.
It is a universal defense mechanism against feeling foolish. It is incredibly tempting to just pretend you understand to save time, especially when you know there are other parents waiting outside the door. But the communication guides are very firm on this point. Nodding along helps no one, least of all, your child.
Address the listener directly here. It is completely fine to ask for repetition. It shows you care. But it's just so hard to interrupt a professional who is in the middle of a sentence, especially if you already feel self-conscious about your English.
It is more than okay. It is expected. Teachers vastly prefer that you stop them. The guides provide an "I don't understand" toolkit for these exact moments.
The polite interruption phrases they provide are so wonderfully simple. Things like, "Could you please repeat that?" Or, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand what that means." Or even just, "Could you slow down, please?"
Notice how those phrases use a calm tone. You aren't panicking. And there is a fascinating nuance in the communication sources regarding how you ask for that help. It comes down to choosing between asking a teacher to explain versus asking them to clarify.
I saw this in the guide. What is the functional difference between those two words in this setting?
It's about signaling your level of comprehension. You use the phrase, "Could you please clarify?" when you understand most of the conversation but need one specific detail cleared up. For example, could you clarify if that reading assignment is due Tuesday or Wednesday?
And explain is for when you are totally lost.
Exactly. Reserve, could you please explain? For when you need a broader, deeper breakdown of a totally new concept. Could you please explain how the new grading rubric works? It asks the teacher to start from the beginning.
Using those two words deliberately makes you sound so in control of the dialogue. And that leads right into advocating and action planning. The ultimate partnership question you can ask is, what can we do at home?
They love that question. But the advice here is that you must push for concrete examples. If a teacher gives you a generic suggestion like, just read more, you shouldn't accept that at face value. You need to ask for an actionable task.
Something like, write a short diary of 3 sentences each day. If the goal is vague, you'll never know if you're actually helping.
Precisely. Concrete goals are achievable goals.
Now, what happens if you have a serious concern to bring up? Let's say your kid is dealing with a bully, a bad seating arrangement, or dropping grades. You have to advocate for your kid, but you don't want to sound like you are attacking the teacher.
This is where diplomacy is essential. The role-play scripts offer a great framework. Instead of marching in with an accusation, you reframe the issue as a shared puzzle. You use phrases like, "It has come to our attention that."
So it's come to our attention that our daughter is distracted by her seating arrangement. It completely removes the emotion. It frames the problem as a team challenge rather than an accusation.
It depersonalizes the conflict. Another great phrase is, "What intervention strategies might you suggest?" You're inviting the teacher to use their professional expertise to solve the puzzle with you. If we connect this to the bigger picture, teachers genuinely want parents to share these concerns. They only see your child for a few hours a day. They rely on your insights.
It really is a two-way street, but it's a very short street. You usually only have a 10-minute slot. As the clock winds down, how do we close the meeting like a pro?
The resources suggest utilizing the summary technique. Wrap up the 10-minute slot efficiently by summarizing the action steps out loud. You say, "Let me make sure I'm clear. I'm going to do X and you're going to do Y."
It creates a verbal contract. There's no ambiguity. And then you end politely. Share final phrases like, "Thank you for your feedback, and it was very helpful to talk with you today."
And crucially, the follow-up. The guides remind the listener to send a brief follow-up email a few days later. Just thank the teacher and confirm the action points in writing. It cements the partnership.
A short email really does work wonders. So, to wrap up everything we've talked about today, remember that a parent-teacher conference is not a test for the parent or the child. It is simply a conversation. Armed with these specific phrases, you can handle it with absolute confidence.
I want to leave the listener with a final, provocative thought to ponder based on the source material about the changing landscape of education. As classrooms become more personalized and technology-driven, how might the traditional 10-minute, twice-a-year parent-teacher conference evolve?
That is a great question.
Could we be moving toward a future where parents and teachers collaborate in real time, completely reshaping what it means to be an active participant in a child's education? It is a fascinating shift to consider.
It really is. The technology might change, but the need for clear communication never will. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those phrases handy, and we will catch you next time.